You could have somebody who's very knowledgeable about content creation and very knowledgeable about the podcasting world, and they have all the head knowledge. They're an encyclopedia in the flesh, but you might not trust them enough to work with them. See, that the knowledge is really only half of what someone needs to know before they consider working with you. The other half is, do I like this person? Do I trust this person? Do I know this person? And that answer, they're not going to find in your blog.
Your podcast should be your most powerful business development tool, a trust and authority builder, and your content creation engine. Let's help your podcast help your business with the Story Trust Media Podcast. Here's your host, John Gehring.
So I'm working with a new client that I'm super excited about, and they've told me about their blogging past. They've written a blog for over 6 years, never once got a client out of it. Always found it kind of cumbersome, low results, low statistics. They started a podcast and they've gotten one client out of it. And, it's certainly not a magical cure in their content creation, but it has gotten them some results and some authority that they never saw from the blog. And I'm thinking to myself, why? I mean, content creation is so important, right? And I'm all for blogging and I'm obviously all for podcasting. Why, for this particular client, was podcasting so far so much more of a successful avenue for them than blogging, even just in the few short months that they've been doing it so far? Well, I dug in deeper and I realized that podcasting beats blogging in a lot of ways, especially in our modern content consumption worlds. And that's not to say that blogging doesn't still have a place. But let me break down some of the reasons that podcasting for you might be a good solution, and then give you maybe a win-win at the end where you can actually find a way to incorporate both into your content marketing game plan. All right, number one, written content tells people what you know, but podcasts, when done right, they tell people who you are. That's right. Authenticity is so important nowadays, right? We can't even tell what's real and what's not. And in this day and age, just telling people what we know is not enough. A blog post, a LinkedIn article, something on your website, okay, they communicate your expertise, and that's important. But the only question they're answering is, okay, does John know his stuff? Not who is John and is he trustworthy to work with? In fact, you could have somebody who's very knowledgeable about many different things, about the problem that you need to solve. In my case, you could have somebody who's very knowledgeable about content creation and very knowledgeable about the podcasting world, and they have all the head knowledge. They're an encyclopedia in the flesh, but you might not trust them enough to work with them. See, that the knowledge is really only half of what someone needs to know before they consider working with you. The other half is, do I like this person? Do I trust this person? Do I know this person? And that answer, they're not going to find in your blog. They're going to find in video, in audio content. And then more importantly, they're going to find by actually getting to know you face to face, person to person. But a podcast accelerates that through the power of trust building with face to face and voice connection. Now, number two, we're talking a little neuroscience here, the power of hearing someone speak. This is much different than just reading someone's words, where your brain processes that information. But when you hear someone's voice, your brain processes that person and that personality, not just the information, the tone, the pacing, the pauses before someone makes a point. Even when someone's laughing at their own joke, right? All of that you can try to convey in writing, and I'll tell you, bolded and italicized text and emojis can do a good job of, making the most of that, but it's still not the same as hearing a person. In fact, they recently did a study about deep fakes and the power of being able to detect someone's intricacies via speech and video versus being able to detect different words on a page, whether or not they're authentic to a person or not. It's amazing that someone is able to, when faced with a deep fake of a loved one versus, their actual loved one in the flesh, they're able to detect the difference versus when they're faced with a loved one's words that are written versus words that are written trying to imitate a loved one. Basically, the point is it's easier to imitate through writing than it is through speaking and video. And that's why one of the reasons why it's such a powerful trust building tool, because the authenticity shines through. Blog posts, the average one online is spent about 37 seconds is what someone spends reading it, which is probably not what you want to actually build a relationship with your audience and keep them coming back for more. Okay, they're reading the headlines, they're kind of skimming through, looking for any bolded text, bigger text, emojis, anything that pops out. And that's why it is when you are writing a blog. I'm no blogging expert, but I know it's important to make that really important text stand out, because the reality is they're not going to sit through all of the less important text, right? But when it comes to podcasting, when it comes to creating that sort of video and audio content for your brand, there is a lot less skipping through going on. Now, you look at your podcast numbers and you say, John, I still, 80% of my audience is dropping off in the first few minutes. All right, that happens, especially on a platform like YouTube, right? That's bound to happen. You're never going to get 100% retention. But the power of podcasting is that about 80% of people who stay through the first 3 minutes of an episode will finish the whole thing. Whereas in blogging, you're skimming through. In podcasting, you're playing it in real time. Now, somebody can play it on 1.25 speed or whatever. Great, fine, whatever. They're still getting the information and the intonation that you're putting out there, just maybe a little higher pitch. But the power of, again, that spoken word neuroscientifically is actually doing something in our minds. And that's one of the reasons we sit through that content more than that written content. And then finally, there's that trust factor of hearing your voice and the authority that comes with it. And it builds your authority, which builds trust with someone over time, and that effect compounds. Now, a blog can certainly build authority. You can be a expert in your niche when it comes to a blog, but the power of podcasting is that there's a little more effort that goes into it than a blog. In fact, so many people have blogs now. It's so easy to create a blog. AI can create a blog for you, and people say AI can create a podcast for you as well. But again, it's easier for someone to detect a deepfake AI podcast versus a deepfake AI blog. So if you want to stand out and really show that you are an expert in your niche, it takes a little bit more effort to do this instead of, oh, I'll just throw a blog together and call that content marketing. Then podcasting is the way to go. So I also promise that there's a way to make this a win-win, right? At Story Trust Media, we talk about using your podcast as a content creation engine. And that's the power of podcasting done right. So you can have a blog that's repurposed from your podcast and still put out weekly content for those who prefer to read, because there still are those people, but have it all fueled by a podcast. You see, it's so much easier to create a podcast first and create a blog out of it because you have a transcript. And I don't just recommend posting the transcript, but I recommend massaging it and making it better for written content. And that's great. But think about it the other way. Making a blog into a podcast is much harder. It's a lower quality podcast if you're just reading off your blog. It's called an audio blog, not a podcast. So, starting a podcast and repurposing that into different elements, such as a blog, is a really low time, low commitment way to get the best of both worlds in a win win situation. So, the blogging versus podcasting conversation, well, my client, who I've been working with for a few months now, who's already gotten a client out of their podcast, they're definitely with me on this. And that is that podcasting is the clear winner here in most industries, right? It's more of an authority builder, more of a trust builder. That client would agree after spending over 6 years blogging and now just several months podcasting. I choose podcasting over blogging. However, there is a way to, as my grandma always used to say, have your cake and eat it too. And that is through the power of repurposing your podcast into a lot of different elements, including a blog. If you want to learn more about what we do and how we make that possible, storytrust.media. Let's talk.
Thanks for checking out the Story Trust Media podcast. Learn more about what Story Trust Media can do for your business and book a free consultation at storytrust.media.